Berlin no longer feels like a city. The streets are covered in broken glass, collapsed buildings, and smoke so thick it blocks the morning light. Somewhere nearby, Soviet artillery strikes again. The walls around you shake violently. Dust falls from the ceiling. Nobody speaks, because everyone already understands what's happening. Germany is losing the war, and now, the war has arrived in Berlin itself. Inside apartments, subway tunnels, and underground bunkers, millions of civilians and soldiers are trapped together, waiting for the end. This was not victory anymore. This was survival. By April 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing from every direction. The Soviet army pushed toward Berlin from the east. American and Allied forces advanced from the west. Years of bombing had already damaged huge parts of the city. Food shortages were severe. Fear spread everywhere. But Adolf Hitler refused to surrender. Instead, Berlin was ordered to fight until the very end. And so, one of the darkest urban battles in modern history began. Not just a battle for territory, but a battle inside a dying capital, filled with civilians who had nowhere left to run. The bombardment began before many people even saw Soviet soldiers. Day and night, artillery shells slammed into Berlin. Buildings collapsed across entire streets. Windows shattered constantly. Electricity failed in many districts. Water became difficult to find. And underground shelters filled with terrified civilians. Families slept inside subway tunnels, basements, and crowded bunkers. The air smelled like smoke, dust, burning wood, and fear. Above ground, Berlin looked almost unreal. Trams sat destroyed in the middle of roads. Fires burned through the night. Dead horses lay frozen beside ruined buildings. And everywhere, people moved quickly through the streets, trying not to be seen. Because snipers, artillery, and collapsing structures could kill someone instantly. The city itself was becoming dangerous to exist inside. Many German soldiers defending Berlin were exhausted long before the battle even began. Some were veterans, others were teenagers. By 1945, Germany was running out of experienced soldiers. Boys from the Hitler Youth were handed weapons and sent into collapsing streets. Some were barely old enough to shave. Inside Berlin, combat became brutally close range. Fighting happened inside stairwells, hallways, apartment buildings, and ruined subway entrances. Sometimes soldiers fought for single rooms. At night, the sound of gunfire echoed through empty buildings like thunder. Sleep became almost impossible. Food was scarce. Medical supplies barely existed in some areas. And yet, orders continued. Hold the street, defend the bridge, do not retreat. But many soldiers already understood the truth. The war was over. Berlin simply hadn't stopped collapsing yet. For civilians, fear became constant. Not just fear of death, fear of what would happen when the fighting finally reached them. Rumors spread rapidly through shelters and basements. People whispered about Soviet revenge, looting, executions, violence. Nobody knew what was true anymore. They only knew the front line was getting closer. Each day, the artillery sounded louder. Each night, more buildings disappeared into fire. Inside underground bunkers, people sat silently for hours listening to explosions above them. Children cried quietly. Some adults stopped reacting entirely. After weeks of bombardment, many civilians became emotionally numb. One survivor later described Berlin as a city waiting for something terrible to finish happening. And above all of this, Hitler remained underground inside the Führer bunker, still issuing orders, still talking about victory, while the city around him slowly died. By late April, Soviet forces had entered central Berlin. Street fighting intensified everywhere. Tanks rolled past burning buildings. Machine gun fire echoed through intersections. Smoke covered entire districts. Some civilians tried escaping through underground tunnels. Others stayed hidden inside basements, hoping the battle would pass over them. But there was no safe place left. Inside the Führer bunker, the atmosphere became increasingly desperate. Reports grew worse every hour. German defenses collapsed street by street. And then, on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide underground. Many people inside Berlin didn't even learn about it immediately, because outside the bunker, the city was still fighting, still burning, still collapsing. But psychologically, something had already ended. The illusion that Germany could still win the war finally disappeared. In May 1945, Berlin finally surrendered. The battle was over. But what remained of the city barely resembled the capital that once stood there. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. Millions of civilians were displaced. Thousands of soldiers and civilians were dead. And for survivors, the memories remained long after the fighting ended. Because the fall of Berlin was not simply a military defeat. It was the slow collapse of an entire world. A city consumed by fear, exhaustion, propaganda, and total war. For those trapped inside it, Berlin did not feel like the end of a battle. It felt like the end of reality itself. The terrifying thing about the fall of Berlin wasn't just watching a city collapse. It was watching millions of people slowly realize their world had already ended before the fighting did.